But then he puts a full stop and he doesn't talk about it because he's too weak to do so. So the prospect of having Russia with a greater presence in our region is very real, and there are a lot of questions that the government still has to answer. Now, we have asked for a briefing in relation to the matter. That hasn't been forthcoming yet, so we'll get that, I hope, today, but in due course. And I want to make sure that we can have very strong relationships with all of our neighbours, including Indonesia, an incredibly important friend and neighbour to us. But there are many questions that need to be answered. As we know, the relationship between Russia and Indonesia is closer under this president, and we want to make sure that our relationship is a respectful one. And I want to make sure that the Australian people understand the risks in our region and over this period of time. The Prime Minister wants to pretend that it's not the reality, but when he says that we live in the most precarious period since the end of 1945, these are exactly the things that he's talking about, but his leadership is too weak to go any further to explain it to the Australian people.
But Mr. Dutton, did President Prabowo ever say that Russia requested access to an...
No, the reference I made was obviously to what is a very credible military website, and that talked about government sources and the Prabowo government sources. Now, it's obvious that Indonesia, well, it's a matter of fact that Indonesia has joined with Russia and with Brazil and with other countries, including China. They are closer together now. We don't know from the government exactly what happened because the government doesn't know. The government has reacted as the Prime Minister did, as I did yesterday, to the media reports, very credible media reports. And the Prime Minister and the Defence Minister and the Foreign Affairs Minister found out about this from media reports, as they did in relation to the advice about the Chinese naval ship, as they've done in relation to the tariffs. Penny Wong talks a big game, but I don't think she's a foreign minister who's on top of her brief.
Did you jump the gun then in responding to those reports?
Just wanted to talk about the PNG Foreign Minister. He said that he'd rather Labor be voted in, just saying if something is working well, why replace it, why destroy it? He said he didn't have anything against you, but what is your response to this comment?
Well, I've known Justin for about 20 years, and he's doing a great job as Foreign Affairs Minister in PNG. He comes from Melbourne, in fact. He's a colourful character. He's very colourful up in PNG, and he's a friend of our country, so we can work very effectively with the government. I've had friendships with successive Prime Ministers in PNG, and Justin's a good friend of our country, and obviously a Melbourneian originally, and he's doing a good job up there. That will come across the side.
So, Mr. Dutton, you talk about it being a precarious global environment. Doesn't that put a requirement on national leaders to gather all the facts before they make significant pronouncements? Did you overplay your hand yesterday, and do you risk insulting the Indonesians? You're suggesting that the President must have had knowledge of any comment that was given to this publication. Was that an overreach? Do you risk damaging the relationship with Indonesia?
Look, when we've got a weak Prime Minister here in Australia who rips $80 billion out of defence, when you've got a Foreign Minister who is out of her depth despite having more front than Maya, the fact is that when you have a Foreign Minister and a Defence Minister and a Prime Minister finding out about decisions from our friends and from countries abroad, when they find out about that on CNN or on Fox or whatever it is, you know that this government is not up to it. And that's why Australians realise that yes, we do live in a precarious period, and if we want to have strong relationships, we need to have open discussions, and we need to make sure that the government is given forewarning. That hasn't happened here. So there are a lot of details that I hope that we can get out of the briefing. The government has delayed the briefing, obviously, and we'll hopefully get that briefing today. But you've got a Prime Minister here, as he's demonstrated. I mean, how on earth can the Prime Minister of our country only find out about the activities in relation to the naval ships that have circumnavigated our country from a Virgin pilot? How can the Foreign Minister not have had a phone call from her counterpart in the United States to say that tariffs were coming? This is a government that's been out of its depth in relation to international relations, and I think that demonstrated it in the defence space as well. The relationship between Indonesia and Russia is closer. We know that, and we want to work very closely with Indonesia, continue that relationship, because we don't want the presence of Russian assets in our region. It would be difficult for us, it would be difficult for other Asian nations, and that's not something that we should just sit idly by and pretend is not part of a discussion.
But Mr.
Oh,
Dutton,
hang on,
sorry, Mr. Dutton, you said it came directly from the Indonesian government. You can see now that was incorrect.
I dealt with that a second ago.
Mr. Dutton, you said at Law Institute earlier this year that you visit the US as your first foreign visit if you're elected as Prime Minister. Will you now go to Jakarta, as has been mentioned, to repair the relationship?
We have a very strong relationship with Jakarta, and I've known successive ministers and presidents. I've met both the current president and his immediate predecessor on a number of occasions. We have an excellent relationship with Indonesia. A number of ministers in the foreign affairs space as well as in the national security space. So I have an excellent relationship with many nations in the region. But there's a lot of damage that this government's done in relation to our international standing. That much is obvious. When you have significant events taking place that impact upon Australia, and the Australian government having no clue about it,
So will you visit Donald Trump
you know the Prime Minister is out of his depth. So we've said what our plans would be if we're successful at the election. That stands.
Mr. Dutton, under the last coalition government, you only found out about the secret security pact with China after the fact, and now you're saying that you don't want to co-host COP31 with Pacific nations, which is their number one concern. Are you risking Australia's national security by losing the trust of Pacific nations and pushing them towards China?
Well, I was part of a government who provided vaccines to Pacific Island nations, and when you speak to each of those leaders, as they've done since COVID, they were unbelievably grateful for the support that we provided. The logistics that we provided came out of my department, and we worked very closely with our neighbours, and we met their need in a way that China or no other country was able to. So I think if you have a look at the facts are that when we were in government, we were a great partner with many countries, including some that you've referred to. When Penny Wong applies a test and then she fails to meet that test herself, I think the questions really are of her. Now,
Mr. Dutton, and you have been asked this several times, but clearly we need a bit more clarity. Do you concede it was a mistake to say that the Indonesian president had confirmed those reports?
I made the point earlier in relation to the reference that I made, and I think I'll be clear in relation
And what was that answer then? Because we're all trying to ask the same question, and we just want to clarify your answer.
Yeah,
was it a mistake?
And I provided the response to that exact question.
Can you provide a bit more clarity on that?
Provide more clarity on your
Would a
response.
coalition government maintain the 8% growth rate target for the National Disability Insurance Scheme?
Well, we want to see the NDIS grow, and we were strong supporters of it. In fact, we supported legislation in the last Parliament after I approached the Prime Minister to say that we would support legislation to make the NDIS sustainable. Now, the program is at about $48 billion a year now. It's growing, as you point out, at 8% year on year, so it's significant growth. But there are lots of concerns, and Bill Shorten himself highlighted these, around fraud and organised crime groups, and I know that there have been some arrests made, or some matters before the courts at the moment. So if there's waste, if people are ripping off the Australian taxpayer or ripping off those participants in the NDIS, then that's not expenditure that we would support. But I want to see the NDIS sustainable and grow, and the rate at which that grows, you'd have to take that advice from the department and the central agencies about where the cost pressures are. I strongly support the NDIS, but it's with taxpayers' money growing at a very significant rate, and I want to make sure that the priority remains those participants and those who are most in need, particularly profoundly disabled. And I think I said this at the time. One of the things that I strongly supported in the formation of the NDIS was the arrangements for ageing parents who were worried about what would happen with their adult disabled children when they passed, and that I think that is a core feature of the NDIS, and I want to make sure that we support that into the future.
Mr. Dutton, so you mentioned, just in relation to Tom's question, you want to see the NDIS grow, but you didn't really commit to that 8%.
No, it's at 8%. I've said if there's fraud in the system.
It's well above 8% right now. 8%
Well, it's 8% is the projection that I think the government's got at, and it's in its budgets, and so we're, we haven't got the advice of Treasury and Finance, so we rely on their budget papers. But look,
There could be room, in your view, for it to keep growing, but you're not wedded to the 8% figure, so it could keep growing, but not necessarily at an 8% rate. That would be something your government would work towards.
We're committed to the figures that are in the budget, and if we're made aware of fraud, of money that's being paid out to organised crime groups, then we wouldn't allow that, as the government wouldn't either. I don't think the Prime Minister's telling you that they're going to be facilitating payments to organised crime groups, unless you've got some different information. But look, I think ultimately what this comes down to, this election, is who is best able to manage the economy so that we can pay for these programs. Who's best able to help Australians get into homes like the ones behind us? We've had an unbelievably bad period of government over the last 3 years. People have lost their homes. People have. I was talking to a real estate agent. She texted me this morning from My Electric. There are now forced sales coming from banks. Okay, we haven't seen that in big numbers since the Labor government was in the 80s and 90s. But there are a lot of families who are sitting with an asset, with a house that is worth less than their loan at the moment under this government. Now, what we've said is that we want to increase supply. We want to stop the Big Australia policy, which has led to the demand for housing, which has locked a lot of young Australians out. We're going to make sure that we can cut migration so that we can support Aussie kids into homes. And I want to be the Prime Minister to provide that dream again to young people. I don't want a situation where, as we saw this morning with a young couple who are working hard, paying rent, rent's up by 20% under this government. I don't want them to lose the dream of home ownership, which they have under Anthony Albanese. So we've got a lot of work to do to clean up Labor's mess, but we'll get our economy back on track. And Australians just can't afford 30% more for food, which is what's happened under this government. 34% more for gas, 32% more for electricity. This has been a really tough period for Australian households, and I want to make sure that we can change the government so people don't have to suffer under the Albanese government.
Stop Medicare.
No, mate,
In
no.
October, Russia's ambassador to Indonesia said that you should expect substantive agreements between the two nations. If you're elected, what will your government do differently to manage that increasingly close relationship?
Well, we want to work very closely with Indonesia, as we do with Papua New Guinea and other nations across the region. I sat around the National Security Committee for 6 years, and we worked on arrangements and relationships to support the strengthening of those relationships, including over COVID, as I say, with financial assistance and the dispatching of vaccines, which bolstered the relationship. There's investment that we've made in PNG, for example. So I honestly believe that we have the ability, if we're elected on the 3rd of May, to restore the damage that Labor's done in relation to our international standing. We are seen as a country with a weak Prime Minister, with a Prime Minister who's out of his depth and unable to make the decisions needed to keep us safe in a very uncertain period. And we will enhance those relationships. We have an excellent relationship with Indonesia, but we need to make sure that we can work with them, because having Russia with a permanent presence or a greater presence in our region is not in our country's best national security interests. And we need to make sure that we work to that end.
Mr. Dutton, during your campaign launch, your Nationals leader spoke extensively about how much of a man you were. Your deputy opposition leader spoke and gave ode to the boys in blue and the tradies. You talk about mining, construction, agriculture and energy being the core killers of the economy. In your own campaign launch speech, you mentioned women twice, and that was in relation to how you protect them from domestic violence and crime. A lot of your campaign has been at petrol stations, you've been in trucks. When you speak about female-dominated industries like education, you talk about the woke agenda. What are you offering modern working women?
I'm offering them the chance to get a home.
But that applies to both
homeless women at the moment are at a record level under
But what
this
about
government.
female-dominated sectors?
So let me say, for homeless women who have suffered under this government, we have a better pathway forward. We've said in relation to accessing super that women who have had a really messy relationship breakup, who haven't had a home before or have no roof over their head with their kids, I want to provide that stability. I was a police officer for 10 years and I've worked hard every day in this job to keep women safe and young girls and children safe.
But what about female-dominated sectors?
And I want to
what are
make
you
sure
offering those sectors?
that we can help those families, because Labor has hurt them. And that's the reality of this last 3 years of government. We are going to get our economy back on track. We're going to lower inflation and therefore interest rates, which will help families. We were speaking this morning with a young family, including a young mum, as you
But
were
not
there.
all women are, a modern family. Some of them are in sectors like health, education. These are huge Australian sectors. What are you doing for those sectors?
we're going to invest more each year. When we were in government, in education, we doubled the amount of funding that went into education. That helps teachers, females and males. It helps when we put more money back in people's pockets, which is what we're doing at the moment with our $1,200 give back of your money that you've paid in taxes. The 25-cent a litre reduction is targeted at women who are driving to work or driving kids around, or are delivery truck drivers, or have a second or third job under this government just to make ends meet. I want to make their lives better, and we can do that if we manage the economy well. If we can get inflation down, we can bring interest rates down. Interest rates will go up under a Labor government because they spend too much, and that's why we've got a homegrown inflation problem. We've got a 5-point plan to help women and help young couples, singles into housing, because for young professionals who feel locked out of the housing market at the moment, we're going to make the interest payments on the first $650,000 of their mortgage tax deductible. That is a game. That is a game changer. That is a game changer. And for a young family or for a young professional woman who's at the moment just given up on the dream of home ownership under this government, $1,000, $1,200 a month is only going to benefit that house purchase and the serviceability of the loan. And I want to make sure that we can help Australians, and that's exactly what we'll do if we can win the election on May 3rd. If people want a change of government, if we want to improve lives, if we want to improve home ownership in our country, then vote for your Liberal or National Party candidates at the election. You didn't have one before, so last one. Yep.
Thank you. Overnight there was a security breach with the TN where he was approached in the hotel that he was staying. Do you have security concerns around this? This isn't the first time we've seen something like this.
No, I don't. I think the federal police do a fantastic job, and obviously the state police are involved in protection packages as we move around the country. And as the Prime Minister, I think, rightly pointed out, it's not a lockdown area, it's in a public space as we are. And I think the police do a great job, and I'm sure on that the Prime Minister and I could agree.
Did that behaviour get called out?